It all started on a rainy afternoon. I had just moved into the old Victorian house my late uncle had left me in his will. The neighborhood was quiet, almost unnervingly so, and the house itself had a presence, a kind of weight that made the air feel heavier the moment I stepped inside. The floorboards creaked under my feet, and the faint smell of aged wood mixed with dust followed me as I explored room after room. At first, everything seemed normal. The grand living room, the high ceilings, the ornate moldings. But as I wandered, a faint draft caught my attention. It wasn't coming from a window or the door, it was coming from the wall. One evening, I stood in the hallway, staring at a section of the wall that seemed slightly off. The wallpaper had tiny bubbles, almost as if something was pressing against it from behind. My curiosity got the better of me, and I ran my hand over the surface. The texture felt unusual, slightly hollow. I started investigating, gently pressing along the wall, listening. Then, faintly, I heard it, a hollow thud, like a muffled sound coming from behind. My pulse quickened. I had lived in old houses before, but never had I experienced something like this. A hidden room? The thought sent chills down my spine. Over the next few days, I returned with tools, a hammer, a screwdriver, and some courage I wasn't sure I truly possessed. I tapped along the wall, trying to find a weak spot. Hours passed, and frustration began to set in. But just when I was about to give up, my fingers brushed against a tiny indentation in the molding. With a click, the section of the wall swung inward. My eyes widened in disbelief. There it was, a narrow passage, shrouded in darkness, a door that had never been mentioned in any documents or memories I had of the house. I hesitated. The air coming from the passage was musty, heavy, and cold, as if it had been sealed for decades. I could hear the faint sound of dripping water somewhere inside, echoing through the small space. Something in my gut screamed at me to leave, but another part, a part one couldn't ignore, demanded I see what was hidden. With a deep breath, I grabbed a flashlight and stepped inside. The wooden door creaked ominously behind me as I entered. The walls were lined with old, peeling wallpaper, the floor covered in a thick layer of dust and debris. It smelled of decay, and something else, something metallic. My light scanned the room slowly, revealing shelves filled with boxes, jars, and strange objects that I couldn't immediately identify. Old books, papers, and, surprisingly, a collection of photographs that looked decades old. As I picked up the first photograph, my heart skipped a beat. It was of my uncle, but he wasn't alone. Standing beside him was a man I had never seen before, and behind them, in the shadows of the photo, was what looked like a symbol carved into the wall of a room. I couldn't make it out clearly, but it seemed deliberate, almost ritualistic. My hands trembled as I put the photograph down. I moved deeper into the room, carefully examining the objects. Some were mundane, old tools, broken furniture, but others were unsettling. A stack of journals lay in a corner, the leather cracked and worn. I opened one, and the handwriting inside was frantic, filled with cryptic warnings about someone watching and references to things that were better left forgotten. Suddenly, I heard it, a faint whisper, almost inaudible. My breath caught in my throat. I told myself it was the wind, the old house settling. But the sound grew clearer, a soft murmur of words I couldn't make out. My heart pounded as I shined the flashlight toward the source, but the beam cut through only dust and shadows. There was nothing, or so I thought. I took a step back, my mind racing. How could this room exist, hidden for decades? Why had my uncle never mentioned it? And most importantly, what had he been keeping here? My instincts screamed at me that whatever secrets lay within this hidden room were dangerous, and perhaps better left untouched. But curiosity, stubborn and unrelenting, would not let me leave. The first night I spent in the house after discovering the room, sleep evaded me. Every creak, every whisper of wind outside felt magnified. I kept thinking of the journals, the photographs, the strange symbol. I realized that this was no ordinary hidden room. Something about it, something tangible in the air, told me that the house itself had been keeping secrets far darker than I could imagine. By morning, I made a decision. I would return. I would explore further. I didn't know what I would find, but one thing was certain. The hidden room had pulled me into a story I could no longer escape. And as I took a deep breath and prepared to step inside again, I felt it. The house was watching, waiting, and I was no longer just a visitor. I had become part of its secret. After the first night, sleep became a distant memory. Every creak of the house, every shadow cast by the morning sun through the cracked windows, reminded me of the hidden room and what might be lurking inside. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, but the journals and photographs I had glimpsed lingered in my mind like an unshakable whisper. I returned to the hidden room early the next day, armed with flashlight, gloves, and a notebook. I knew that whatever secrets lay in this space, I needed to document them carefully. As soon as I stepped inside, the air hit me again, cold, musty, and tinged with a faint metallic smell. It wasn't just the air, it felt alive, almost aware of my presence. The journals caught my attention first. Their leather bindings were cracked, pages yellowed and brittle, but the handwriting within was intense and precise, yet frantic at times. The first journal belonged to my uncle, the previous owner of the house. He wrote about his life, his family, and then something darker. Some things are better left buried. One entry began. The hidden room holds what should never see the light. I fear what I have discovered, and yet I cannot resist the temptation to keep it. Another entry spoke of strange noises in the night, whispers that seemed to come from the walls themselves, and shadows that moved without explanation. There were sketches of symbols, similar to the one I had seen in the photograph, carved into walls, floors, and even furniture. Each symbol seemed to repeat, forming patterns that were strangely hypnotic. I flipped through more pages, and my heart sank. The journals detailed a series of events that no one would believe. My uncle had apparently discovered something, or someone, living in the hidden room long before he passed away. He wrote about objects moving on their own, cold spots that no ordinary air could explain, and whispers that sometimes became coherent words. One phrase repeated in almost every journal entry: "The room demands a witness." The words chilled me to my core, as if the room itself required someone to watch, to acknowledge its existence, or perhaps to feed on their fear. I glanced around the room again. The shelves were lined with jars filled with unidentifiable substances, powders, liquids, and strange preserved objects that made my stomach churn. Among them were old toys, small trinkets, and personal items that seemed disturbingly out of place, as if they had belonged to people who had vanished. Suddenly, a sound echoed from the far corner of the room, a soft thud, followed by scraping. My heart jumped. I froze, listening. There it was again, a faint, deliberate sound like someone or something was moving something heavy across the floor. My mind screamed that I should leave, that I should call someone, anyone. But something inside me pushed forward, demanding I understand what this room truly was. I slowly approached the source of the sound, shining my flashlight across the floor. There, tucked beneath a loose floorboard, was a small, carved box. The wood was old, worn, and darkened with age. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside, I found photographs, more than I could count, of people I didn't recognize, each with eyes wide in terror. Beside the photographs were handwritten notes, some in my uncle's handwriting, others in a scrawled, almost illegible script. The notes spoke of individuals who had disappeared over decades, all linked to the house. Each note ended with the same chilling warning: "Do not stay too long." A cold sweat ran down my spine. I wanted to leave, to run, but I couldn't tear myself away. The room seemed to pulse, the air thickening, almost pressing against me like an unseen force. The whispers began again, louder this time, forming words I could barely understand. I strained my ears. "You shouldn't be here." I spun around, flashlight darting across the shelves and walls. Nothing moved, yet the sensation of being watched intensified. My chest tightened, every instinct screaming danger. I realized that this was no ordinary hidden room. Whatever my uncle had discovered, it had a presence, and it knew I was here. Trying to steady my nerves, I focused on the journals again. There was one I hadn't opened yet, the largest and oldest. Its cover was made of dark leather, embossed with symbols that made my skin crawl. As I opened it, the air seemed to grow colder, the shadows deeper. The pages revealed rituals, strange incantations, and references to a keeper who resided in the room. The keeper, according to the journal, was not human, or at least not entirely. My uncle had written about encountering it, describing glowing eyes in the darkness and whispers that promised both knowledge and doom. The entries became increasingly frantic, almost incoherent toward the end, as if he had descended into terror and obsession. I closed the journal, my hands trembling. A sudden draft blew through the room, extinguishing a candle I hadn't noticed I was holding. In the dim light of my flashlight, I caught movement, a shadow at the far end of the room, shifting, almost waiting for me. I realized then that I was no longer simply exploring a hidden room. I had stepped into a space that had secrets older than the house itself, a place that had been waiting, patient and silent, for a new witness. And I had answered its call. The moment I stepped further into the hidden room, I felt an oppressive weight pressing down on me. The air had grown colder, denser, as if every breath I took carried the room's will inside me. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the walls, twisting with each flicker of my flashlight. I couldn't tell what was solid and what was not. I tried to calm myself. "It's just an old room," I muttered aloud, though even my own voice sounded strange, swallowed by the silence. But deep down, I knew this wasn't ordinary. The journals had hinted at something my uncle had feared. And now, I was beginning to understand. The hidden room was alive. I picked up another photograph, this one more recent, yet decades old. A young couple smiled, posed in front of a fireplace. But the shadows behind them were wrong, elongated, stretching in impossible directions. My stomach churned as I noticed a figure crouched in the corner of the photo, barely visible, with glowing eyes staring directly at the camera. Suddenly, a cold gust of wind slammed the door behind me shut. My heart leapt into my throat. I tried to pull it open, but it was stuck, as if held by an invisible hand. Panic surged, but I forced myself to breathe and think. I needed to document everything. The journals were still spread across the floor, and I picked the oldest one. The pages were brittle, ink faded, yet the words were vivid. They described the keeper of the room, the entity that resided here, feeding off fear, feeding off secrets. According to my uncle, the keeper could manipulate reality within the room, change objects, and even bend time slightly, making hours feel like minutes or vice versa. As I read, I heard it again, a whisper, closer this time. "You shouldn't be here." My flashlight trembled in my grip as I shone it toward the source. The room seemed empty. Yet, the shadows shifted as though alive, curling toward me, recoiling, then inching closer again. I stepped back instinctively, my foot hitting a small box. It tipped over, spilling its contents, more photographs, trinkets, and a small doll. Its face was cracked, eyes staring blankly. Something about it felt unnerving. I picked it up. And then I saw it, a symbol, carved into the wall, glowing faintly. The same symbol my uncle had sketched repeatedly in the journals. It pulsed with a rhythm, almost like a heartbeat. My hand shook as I reached toward it, curiosity and terror warring inside me. As soon as I touched the symbol, the shadows convulsed violently, and a cold voice filled the room. "You are the witness now." I staggered back, my flashlight clattering to the floor. The shadows coalesced, forming shapes, twisting into humanoid forms that seemed to shift constantly. Their eyes glowed faintly in the dark, staring into me with an intelligence that was not human. Every instinct screamed to flee, but the room seemed to grow larger, expanding beyond the walls, trapping me in its center. Desperate, I grabbed another journal and tried to read aloud from it. The words were rituals, incantations, meant to pacify the keeper. As I spoke them, a wind rose from nowhere, blowing papers across the room, extinguishing candles. The shadows hesitated, writhing in the corners, and the room seemed to breathe around me. I realized that the keeper was testing me, gauging my fear, my resolve. If I panicked, it would close in completely. If I remained calm, perhaps I could survive. My heart pounded, sweat dripped down my forehead, but I forced myself to steady my breathing. Then I noticed movement in the corner of my eye. The shelves, the jars and boxes, shifted slightly, as if the objects themselves were alive. Some items had moved since I entered. A jar now lying on its side, a photograph face down, a book that had fallen open. The air smelled metallic, tangy, with something I couldn't place. My instinct screamed that this was no ordinary house, no ordinary room. I forced myself to investigate further. Behind one shelf, hidden in darkness, I discovered a narrow stairway leading down, descending into a basement I had never known existed. The journals had never mentioned it. My curiosity overrode my fear, though every nerve screamed at me to leave. I shone my flashlight down the steps. The darkness seemed to absorb the light, and I heard a low, guttural whisper from below, as if something unseen was calling me. I knew that descending into that space would change everything. Whatever lived below was connected to the keeper, perhaps its source. And I couldn't turn back, not now, not after what I had already uncovered. The house had drawn me in, revealing one secret after another, and now it demanded more. With trembling hands, I gripped the railing and stepped down into the darkness, each step echoing in the silent room above. The shadows from the upper room seemed to stretch down the stairs after me, like fingers reaching. And then, just as I reached the bottom, the air grew impossibly cold, and the voice came again, louder this time. "You belong to the room now." I froze, realizing that this was no ordinary hidden room. It wasn't just a room, it was a living entity, ancient, patient, and far more terrifying than anything I could have imagined. My survival depended on understanding its rules, but the question was, did I even stand a chance? The stairs seemed endless, each step creaking under my weight, as though the house itself were protesting my intrusion. The air grew colder with every step, heavy and thick with a metallic tang. By the time I reached the bottom, my flashlight revealed a low-ceilinged, cavernous space carved from stone. The walls were damp, streaked with dark moisture, and the floor was littered with dust, debris, and fragments of objects long forgotten. At first, I saw nothing unusual, just shelves, more jars, and piles of old papers. But as my eyes adjusted, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The shadows were moving independently of the light. They twisted and writhed, forming shapes that shouldn't exist, stretching across the walls and floor. And in the far corner, I saw the first of them, the keeper. It was humanoid, yet distorted. Its eyes glowed like embers in the darkness, and its form flickered, as if it were partly made of shadow and smoke. A low, guttural voice emanated from it, resonating through the stone walls. "Why have you come here?" I swallowed hard, my voice barely a whisper. I just wanted to understand." The entity's presence seemed to pulse in response. "You are curious, like all who come before. Few leave." My heart pounded in my chest. I had heard of haunted houses, sinister secrets, but nothing could have prepared me for this. My uncle's journals, the photographs, the symbols, all of it led here. The hidden room, the keeper, and now this basement were connected. Everything revolved around this place, this entity, and whatever it demanded of its witnesses. I forced myself to focus. The journals had contained rituals, incantations meant to pacify the keeper. Perhaps if I followed them, I could survive. I opened the largest journal again, the one filled with instructions, symbols, and warnings. My hands shook as I traced the faded ink with my fingers. The instructions were detailed, but the language was cryptic, referencing things I barely understood. Draw the circle. Speak the name. Offer the witness. I had no idea what it meant, but instinctively, I felt that I had to follow the steps exactly. The keeper's eyes seemed to pierce through me, judging, waiting. I took a deep breath and started. Using chalk I found in one of the boxes, I drew the circle as precisely as I could. Then, following the journal, I spoke the name written in the margins, a name that had been repeated in the earlier journals, always in whispers. Veyron. The air around me vibrated, thick and electric. Shadows recoiled at first, then surged forward, as if the name had drawn the entity closer. My pulse raced, but I continued, reciting the phrases as written. The keeper's form became clearer, more defined, its glowing eyes boring into mine. And then I felt it, pressure almost physical, as if the room itself were pressing against me. Suddenly, I heard laughter, soft, cruel, human yet not human. It echoed around the basement. The keeper had companions, echoes of past witnesses trapped within the space, their souls woven into its presence. My heart raced. I realized that this room had consumed many before me, each drawn by curiosity or greed, each leaving traces behind for the next to find. A sudden movement caught my eye, a small trapdoor in the corner of the basement, previously hidden beneath debris. My flashlight beam revealed it was old, but functional. The journals had hinted at layers within the hidden room, and I knew this must lead further down, deeper into the heart of the house's secrets. Something inside told me that the most terrifying truths were below, where the keeper's power was strongest. I hesitated. My instinct screamed to leave, to run, to abandon the house forever. But the pull of curiosity, the desire to uncover the truth, was stronger. I opened the trapdoor, revealing a narrow, black passage descending into absolute darkness. Every step I took was careful, deliberate, yet my fear was mounting. The air was colder than anything I had felt before, and the faint whispers now formed words, urging me forward, warning me, taunting me. As I descended, I stumbled upon objects I could not explain. More jars containing unrecognizable substances, tools covered in dried stains, and symbols etched into the walls in patterns that made my head spin. And then, at the bottom, I found it, a room unlike any other in the house. It was circular, with stone walls covered entirely in carvings and symbols. In the center lay an altar, old and worn, surrounded by remnants of candles long extinguished. And upon the altar was a box that radiated a presence far stronger than the keeper above. I felt it even before I touched it, a malevolent energy, cold and heavy. My hands trembled, but I had to know. I lifted the lid slowly, my heart hammering in my chest. Inside, I found objects that made my blood run cold. Old photographs of people I did not recognize, their eyes wide with terror, notes scrawled in panic, and objects that seemed alive. Among them was a locket that opened on its own, revealing a photograph of my uncle, smiling, but behind him, in shadow, a figure that matched the keeper's description exactly. I realized then the horrifying truth. The hidden room was not just a room. It was a living entity, feeding off fear, curiosity, and secrets. And everything my uncle had documented, the journals, the photographs, the symbols, were all part of a warning, a guide, and a trap for anyone who dared enter. I backed away slowly, my mind racing. The whispers grew louder, almost insistent. The keeper was aware of me now, and the room demanded something from me. I did not yet know what, but I felt in my bones that leaving without answering its demand would be impossible. I stood frozen in front of the altar, the box radiating a darkness I could feel deep in my bones. The whispers had grown into a chorus of voices, pleading, warning, laughing. The keeper's glowing eyes bore into me, and I realized there was only one way to survive. I had to face it, acknowledge it, and leave behind a part of myself as the room demanded. With trembling hands, I spoke aloud. I see you. I understand your secret. I am the witness. The air surged around me like a storm, shadows twisting violently. For a moment, I feared I would be consumed, swallowed into the darkness forever. But then, as suddenly as it began, the chaos stopped. The room grew still. The keeper faded into the shadows, leaving me alone with the box, now harmless and silent. I stepped back, my heart racing, my mind still reeling. I had survived, but I knew the house, the hidden room, and its keeper were patient. They waited for the next curious soul. As I climbed back to the main floor, the house seemed quieter, calmer, but I knew its secrets were still alive, waiting, watching. I had uncovered its terrifying truth and lived to tell the story. If you enjoyed this spine-chilling tale and want more true-life emotional stories filled with suspense, drama, and shocking twists, make sure to subscribe to SoulScripted. Hit the bell icon so you never miss a story that will make you laugh, cry, and question the world around you. Remember, every story here is real, or at least it feels like it. Join the SoulScripted family and step into the unknown, one story at a time. Subscribe now and be part of the journey.